Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong. Normally on this show, we do books. We do books on fiction and nonfiction, cutting-edge works from the publishing world. And today we're doing something different. We're doing a dictionary, the building blocks of books. And it's always fascinating to watch the evolution of language in progress. I was thinking the other day of all the words that are currently in my vocabulary that did not exist just 10 years ago. I mean, Google, for one, I guess, is one that most of us think of that did not exist maybe 10 years ago, but it certainly has taken over our vocabulary with Google Doodles and Googling, and the noun has become a verb, as so often happens with technology. And today we have with us Steve Kleinidler, who is the executive editor of the American Heritage Dictionary. So we got a world expert on this subject of the evolution of language. And good morning, Steve. How are you?
Good morning, William. Thank you for having me on your program.
Oh, I'm delighted to have you because I think language is changing faster than ever before. Is that true?
People often make that claim, but if you look back, there have always been technological innovations. I mean, certainly now they're in the digital realm, but in the 50s and 60s when there was the space race and you had all of these innovations in physics and the precursors to computer science today, there have always been There have always been these areas of semantic little realms that have provided robust additions to the language.
Well, where are the major changes coming from today?
From a variety of sources. Obviously, people will first consider the world of technology, computer science, and just the rise of the internet and all of the words that come from that. But of course, science and technology itself, in a broader scale, is certainly responsible for a large part of our vocabulary. But also even more run-of-the-mill, everyday items, food terms especially, as Americans' cuisines have expanded beyond meat and potatoes in the past several decades. We've taken in food terms from all over the globe. Certainly 100 years ago, we were adding vocabulary from French cuisine. A lot of cooking terms come from French, for example. But in the recent decades, we have ever more Spanish foods, foods from the Middle East, from South Asia, from East Asia, and so forth. So something as simple as food becomes has a huge impact on the language.
Well, here you have on your list one of the new food words is chilaquiles.
That is correct.
And I was mentioning it to one of our engineers here, Juan, who said, well, that's not a new word, because he grew up with it, being Hispanic and all.
Right. Absolutely. This is a good example. Chilaquiles has been a word in Spanish for quite a while. And like many foreign words that come into English, they are slowly anglicized. One way you can tell when a word stops or becomes English in addition to whatever language it came from is the fact that you'll see it used in restaurants and in descriptions in recipes in magazines or in newspapers without explaining what it is. I mean, when people start talking about chilaquiles and they expect you to know what it is without translating it for you in an article, then that's a sign that it's moving over into English. And certainly, since you're down in Texas, most of your listening audience is probably much more familiar with the term and has been for a longer period of time. I just got off with an interview up in Syracuse, New York, and the host had never heard of it, even though when I described the dish, he recognized what it was.
Ah, okay. Well, it really has become quite a blend of cultures here in Texas over the past 20 years, because it used to be when I was a kid, you go to Thanksgiving dinner and you just had turkey and traditional Midwestern cuisine, and now it's very common to have tamales with the turkey. There's a blend of the cuisines and the language as well.
And that's right. And food is, English is truly a melting pot when it comes to food. One of the other terms on our list that we recently added comes from the Italian, for example, which you find in coffee culture. There's a lot of Italian terminology that comes through. And one that we added is crema, C-R-E-M-A, which is the light brown foam that they put on a top of an espresso. 10, 20, 30 years ago, most Americans weren't drinking espresso, and as these drinks become ever more popular, espressos, cappuccinos, and the like, the terminology becomes anglicized and incorporated into English.
Well, another term you have here is, and I'm not even sure how to say it, is burrata. Is that right?
Yes. That is an Italian cheese, mostly mozzarella. It's shaped like a ball. The outer layer is a thin layer of mozzarella, and inside there's this blend of fresh cream and mozzarella curd. Really creamy, really delicious. Again, you'll find it in Italian restaurants, but you'll also find it in modern restaurants that serve modern American cuisine as well. So it's crossing over from Italian into English.
We don't have for the English language, we don't have an academy that certifies words like they do in French and Spanish. So how does a word qualify?
That's entirely correct. In France, for example, you have the Académie Française, which debates and decides what becomes French. My colleagues here at the American Heritage Dictionary, and certainly my colleagues at the other dictionaries in the country, follow pretty much the same standards, and it depends on the type of word. Sometimes in the sciences, this is a really good example when they synthesize a new chemical element, and the body of chemists and physicists who get together to decide what the element is called, once they make their decision, that's it. I mean, you don't need any more authentication because the people in charge have said that's what it is. The same goes for when Pluto was demoted from a planet and became a dwarf planet. When the International Astronomical Union says this is what it is, they're the experts in that field, and that's what you go by.
Okay, so that's kind of top down.
Yeah, but it also that is a relatively small percentage of the words. But there are words that are very top down like that, where the groups in charge are like, this is what it's called. Scientists inventing the name of a new medical compound, for example, the generic names for drugs that we take. When the synthesizers create it and give it a word, that's what it's called. On the opposite end, you'll have pop culture terms, some of which have been around for a while. Those we tend not to put in unless they meet a few criteria. Specifically, we want to make sure we think they're going to stick around. That is, we don't want to enter ephemerality or flash-in-the-pan words that are going to be here one moment and gone the next. Can you give
me an example of a word that was a flash in the pan, that was popular and then went away?
Yeah. Well, I can give you an example of a word that is in the process of being popular and we think is going away, and so we're not adding it right yet, and we may never if it continues to dwindle down. And that word, which has been in the media a lot recently, is twerk, Twerk.
Oh, okay.
Now, the word itself has been around for quite some time, well over a decade, probably close to 20 years, but it's been associated with the jargon of various subcultures, and it only recently hit the mainstream not that long ago. Its use has peaked really up, and it's already starting to plummet. And I suspect that within another couple months, it will be, again, the vocabulary of the various subcultures that use it, as opposed to in the mainstream. So we're going to want to wait and see that it sticks around for a while in the mainstream before we'd add it, because we're not really a slang dictionary. Slang and informal terms, we're really only going to add if we think they're going to stick around for quite some time. An example of which isn't on this list either, but one that we just recently added, which is selfie, the word for the photograph that you take of oneself. In that case, this word, which has also been around for close to a decade, is becoming ever more popular, and certainly as social media sources start using visual images, pictures, and videos more than text. I mean, in the old days, we would send emails or text, and nowadays people are using updates with photos and videos, and as we become more video-based, we're getting more vocabulary that reflects these images, and that's probably likely to stick around.
So selfie has been around that long? That term?
They even though the Slate, one of my colleagues, Ben Zimmer, just wrote an article for Slate about this. They found it on a news site in Australia about 10 years ago. But the person, they tracked down the person who wrote it, and he's like, "Well, yeah, I said it, but I didn't make it up. It was information I was using at the time." And IE suffix in Australia is extremely common. You get Barbie for barbecue, for example.
Okay.
So it was just yet another example in Australia of tacking E on to the E sound on the end of the word.
How fascinating! Yeah.
But Ben Zimmer wrote a really good article in Slate about this process and this phenomenon. But anyhow, so it's been around for a while.
Well, what do you do with things that are they're essentially acronyms like YOLO?
Right. It depends. Certain acronyms go in because they, for example, NASA and NASA, because of what it is and its importance. Less likely, even YOLO for You Only Live Once, that's a good example of something that hit really big and it's kind of fading from use. If you track the use, people aren't throwing it around the way they were just a year ago. So we didn't add it then, and it's becoming less and less likely that we probably would now, unless it comes back and stays for a while.
Well, if you consider a word like a currency that has greater value at sometimes because everybody's using it, and lesser value, how do you measure the success of a word?
What we do is we see how often it's being used. We have access to a lot of databases, both in terms of books, journalism, newspapers, and we're tracking how often it's coming up, how often it's being used, whether the frequency is increasing or decreasing, that sort of thing. So, for a large section of words, it's just charting them and keeping track and seeing where the trend lines go.
Do you drop words?
Very rarely. Fortunately, we try not to put a word in unless we think it's going to stick around, for one. In the past, when we had new editions come out, usually we would have changes in the design that would allow us to add much more than we took out. And now that all of our information is available online, the entire dictionary, for example, is available at ahdictionary.com. You can go to that site and look up all of the words I've been talking about and any other word you have a question about. Now that it's electronic, we don't have to delete words if just for the sake of space, and as a result, I think in the past 2 years we have just deleted a small handful, and most of those were obsolescent technological or scientific words that are no longer in use.
There's a little shift here, but what is the oldest dictionary? When was the first dictionary that we know of compiled?
Well, it depends on what you consider a dictionary to be. Certainly, in the prior to the 16th century, you would have glossaries, word lists of either, for example, a Latin, going from Latin or English, or to gloss what a word might mean in another language. I think, and I'm not a scholar in historical lexicography, but if memory serves me correct, the first ones came into being, I want to say, around the late 1500s, early 1600s, and I should actually know this, but I don't. I've had classes on this, but it's been so long.
Well, I'm impressed with the term, the lexicography, historical lexicography. I'm going to use that several times today and impress people.
Thank you. Certainly older, and it's by no means the oldest. Samuel Johnson's dictionary in the United Kingdom or England was definitely one of the early ones, although there were definitely ones before him. I believe there was one by an editor named Florio. There are certainly guests who could speak to the history much better than I. I can give you suggestions for perhaps future people you'd like to talk to.
Just a random question. It just came to me as we were talking, and you have an obvious depth in this field. So I thought maybe it goes back to ancient Rome or something. The first dictionary.
If you're talking outside of English, certainly. I mean, they've found tablets from, I don't know if it's like Sumerian or again, glossaries showing listings of words. So perhaps not a dictionary in the way where you've got defined headwords with their definitions, but words with glosses. So this goes back probably a couple of millennia.
But twerking probably wasn't there.
Probably not.
I was thinking universities often, you take kind of unique universities, perhaps like Texas A&M has a special culture within Texas, and they give their students a kind of Aggie dictionary for terms unique to that school when they enter there. And I'm sure probably Yale and Harvard have similar things. Let's go through the words, some of the new words that you have listed here. We talked about food a little bit, but let's talk about, here's a good college term, course pack.
Yes. These have been around for a while too. They used to be in print. Now they're much more digital. If a professor has a lot of reading material for a class, but they're all excerpts, the student aren't required to read entire books, but just portions of them. Perhaps it's an anthology or just certain chapters. The professor can pluck out certain bits and pieces from different books, put them together, and then have them copied at the university copy center or whatever. And so it's a collection of readings for a class assigned by a professor.
Well, now, of course, at universities, a term like gradebook doesn't really exist in the old way. You have Blackboard. Blackboard is the software that has the grades, and so,
right, and it's and it's similar. There's been similar shifts for words that were once in the physical world, like cut, paste, window, browser, frame. I mean, much of these computer words are metaphorically or analogously derived from concrete terms from publishing and printing.
I love this term, peak bagging. Peak bagging.
Yes. Peak bagging is the sport of climbing as many mountains as possible that meet certain criteria. So, for example, you could some peak baggers try to climb the highest elevation in every state, which in Colorado and Alaska, of course, would be quite an achievement. In states like Delaware and Rhode Island, it's a little simpler, of course, because of the low elevations. But yeah, you've got people who visit each state with the stated goal of climbing the highest peak there. Or you could take a specific state, such as Texas, and you could decide to go to the highest elevation of every county in Texas. Now, granted, much of Texas is flat.
Yeah, it would be about 100 feet.
Yeah. But in a state like Colorado, which has both flat and, the Rockies, it's a feat of endurance to attempt to do all of that.
Great word. I guess in Texas we'd have to do beach bagging or something, because
the lowest elevation in each county.
Something different. Yeah. The river walk. Now that I'm curious about where that one comes from.
Well, I know for a fact, because several people have told me about it, it is not entirely new in the sense that many cities have had river walks for some time. San Antonio comes to mind.
Yes.
River walk, of course, being a pathway constructed alongside a river, and in that case it's similar to boardwalk or harbor walk or so many other walks. But as more cities across the country are revitalizing their downtowns and trying to energize the core of the city and bring people back to the center of the city, it's the type of amenity that is proposed and built and being found more prominently now. Through architectural magazines or magazines about cities, that kind of thing, it's a term that's risen in prominence, and we didn't have it, and we thought, this would make a good addition. Yeah.
So the reason I said I was very curious is because I grew up going to San Antonio as a little kid a lot, and we would always go to the Riverwalk, and so I wondered if it came from San Antonio, if that was the origin of the word.
I don't know if I know San Antonio has an old Riverwalk. I don't know if it is the oldest. It would certainly be a contender, but I would have to do some research to determine if it was in fact the actual first one. Also because the entire downtown commercial district is kind of built around that Riverwalk. It is the core of commerce for tourism there. So that's why I think a lot of people often use it as a kind of metaphor for what they want to create in their communities. Right.
Okay, let's go on to science and technology terms. We have autocomplete, which everybody hates.
Yeah. Well, people people hate it when it doesn't work properly. When it functions as it should, it kind of just blends in the background, and sometimes you forget it exists. And of course, this would be a function such as on a search engine that supplies you with options of predicted words or phrases beginning with the letters that you've already entered. When you're typing in a search engine and you start like how do I, it'll complete it, and sometimes the results can be completely far afield. But that function is known as autocomplete.
Well, it's been a wonderful asset to Ellen DeGeneres because she just gets entire segments of her show based upon autocomplete that worked badly. In fact, just a minute ago, I was asking on my Facebook page for people to send me suggestions of words to ask you about, and so someone sent me the word burple. And I was trying to put it into, to ask what it was. What is burple? Because I'd never heard of it. And the autocomplete kept changing it to bugle. And so I couldn't even ask the question I wanted to ask. But what is burple? Do you know?
Are you spelling, is it like purple with a B?
Yeah, it's like purple with a B as in Bob.
That I will admit I am not familiar with.
It's a color. It's a new color, they said. So I suppose it's
a combination between brown and purple, perhaps.
I don't know. We'll have to find out, and maybe you can include it in 3 years if it ever takes.
I would say off. It would have to really take off
to reach those heights, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go. Compounding pharmacy.
Yes. What's interesting, here's a compound word, a word consisting of two words that came into the news last year. There was that facility in Massachusetts where drugs that are compounded or prepared. There was a fungus that was introduced because they weren't taking the proper precautions, and people were injecting it and becoming very ill. At any rate, these compounding pharmacies were suddenly in the news, and people were talking about them, and people's awareness of them came to the fore, and we decided it was a good compound to add just so we could explain what is done.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly true. That's what I thought of it as soon as I saw the word. I remembered the news story, and I said, "Bet that's where that comes from."
Yes.
Coronavirus, I suppose, similar.
Yes, it is. This is a virus that SARS is an example of a coronavirus, for example, and they have been, much talked about, with respect to various outbreaks that have happened in the past several years. The coronavirus is a family of RNA viruses that infect mammals and birds. They cause respiratory infections, and they have spikes of glycoproteins, which is, I think, another relatively recent words that project from the viral envelope.
I think that The Walking Dead was supposedly started with the coronavirus. The show.
It may have been. I read the comic book ages ago. I haven't seen the show in quite some time.
Now let's go. Is bruschetta? Is that a food?
It is, and we've had that for a while. And the issue with that is, and this ties into our usage notes, we have a usage panel of about 170 journalists and authors and writers and linguists, people who use English in their day-to-day work, and we periodically poll them on how they view various English usage issues. Mm-hmm. And with bruschetta, there's some people pronounce it bruschetta. Some people pronounce it more as it would be in Italian as bruschetta. We asked the usage panel what they thought. Most of them thought both forms are fine, and when we asked them to pick one, which one they used, there was an almost even split. So that made for an interesting note, because some people who say bruschetta say bruschetta is wrong, vice versa, and we're here to say that, relax, they're both okay.
Well, how about tomato and tomato? Did they decide that one too?
No, I don't think we've ever we've never asked them about that, mm-hmm. But both are, I believe, acceptable variants. Many words in English, of course, have multiple pronunciation variants,
like nuclear and nuclear.
That one's a little more problematic in that a lot of people would claim that nuclear is an incorrect pronunciation, so much so that we have a nice usage note there that explains what the controversy is.
And often and often.
We also have a very nice usage. One good hallmark of a good dictionary is that it doesn't just give you all this information; it also explains it. If you're, there's a fairly lengthy note there that I won't read, but if your listeners are interested, if they went to ahdictionary.com and typed the word "often" into the search bar, they would see a nice usage note about that, and both pronunciations are acceptable.
I read once a wonderful article by a man who was a linguist, and he worked at the Smithsonian Institute, and he said that he didn't like to talk about words being correct. He liked to talk about them as appropriate.
I think that's a really excellent observation. There are certain words that you're going to use in certain contexts, formal contexts, and others that you're not. How you talk on the street corner with your friends is very different if you were like making a presentation in front of the city council or something. He's absolutely right. And one thing that a good dictionary will do is make you aware of these pitfalls. I mean, so we never say don't say this, but our approach is, informal contexts, you'll want to avoid such and such. So I think that's a very, very astute observation.
How about hashtag?
Yes, we added that last year, in fact. That was on our list from last year. It's a very handy word, and as a symbol being used in social media, especially Twitter and Facebook, it becomes there's no sign of it going away anytime soon because it's so ubiquitous and useful.
How about this new digital currency called the Bitcoin?
That's something we're keeping an eye on. It's on our list of words that we are considering. I would say the chances of it going in is a lot stronger now than it was even 12 years ago. Even 12 months ago. But it's something that will sit on just probably a little longer. It's just to be on the safe side.
Well, it's hard to tell if it's going to survive, but
exactly.
It was worth about $1, 3 years ago, and now it's $700 now. So if it hangs in there as a viable currency, then yes, I'm sure you'll put it in there.
Correct.
Well, okay, I'm out of time. I love this. This is great, just going through words. The dictionary is the American Heritage Dictionary, which you can buy in several forms now, right? You can get it.
That is correct.
You tell us about that.
You can go to your favorite bookstore and get it, or order it if they don't have it in the shelves. You can get it on any online bookstore. You can buy it as an app on the Apple or Android platforms, and the content is also available for free online at ahdictionary.com.
When do you think that dictionaries will cease to exist in the physical form?
I think they will be around for a while yet. I think as long as there are print books, there will be print dictionaries. Will there be as many? Maybe not. Probably not. But I think they will exist in print form for some time to come. Especially the juvenile dictionary market is very robust. We produce a line of children's dictionaries, the American Heritage Children Dictionary, the Student Dictionary, the First Dictionary. Those still do really well. And now, as kids today grow up and become parents, will they get those types of things for their children? I don't know. But for now, and I think for children who are raised with a print dictionary, they're probably more likely to stick with them as they get older. As a complement to the digital, I mean, sometimes you just want a quick lookup, and that's great. It's there on the computer. And other times you want to get lost in a sea of words, and that's what the print version's for.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much for joining us today. I've been talking with Steve Kleinendler, Executive Editor of the American Heritage Dictionary, talking about the new words that are now in print. Steve, check with us next year, and let's talk about the new words.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, William. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.
I'm Dr. W.F. Strong for Good Books Radio, signing off.